Hi, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Sue, and today we're going to make a very special Greek walnut cake. It's called Karithopita. And what makes this particular recipe special is that it has all the ingredients of the more time-consuming, laborious Greek desserts like baklava and melamakarna. It has walnuts, it has cinnamon, it has honey, but it's in a really nice, easy to make cake. I know you'll enjoy eating it, and you will enjoy making it because it is so easy. It's really a snap to make, and you make it out of ingredients that you probably have at home. So it's a perfect dessert for the end of a nice dinner, but it doesn't wear you out in making the dessert. So let's get started. Just a reminder, this recipe and the recipe for all the dishes that we cook on this show can be found on our website, Tweeton.com. Not only will you find our recipes, but you'll find other links to Greek websites that will give you more insight into the Greek culture and even some more interesting recipes. Now, to make Karithopita, the old-fashioned Greek way, you needed to grate zwieback crackers. This recipe has a surprise ingredient. My mom discovered this recipe about 30 years ago, and I've asked her a few times, well, I know this recipe is easier to make than the old zwieback crumb recipe, but is it as good? And her answer was simply, no, it's not as good, it's better. And I thought, okay, if my mom thinks it's better, then it's better, and it's easy too. One thing about my mother and my grandmother, is that they were traditionalists in their Greek cooking, but if they found a way to improve the cooking, to make it more nutritious, or to make it easier, they just went ahead and they adapted their recipes. They didn't stick to the old world style recipes just for the sake of hanging on to tradition. Many, many years ago, my mother told me that she and her sister, my Aunt Stella, had a conversation with Grandma about roasting lamb. Every time Grandma made a roast lamb, she did it the old country way. She poured a cup of olive oil over the lamb. And both my aunt and my mother asked her, well, why? Why do you put olive oil over the lamb? The lamb is fatty to start with. Why does it need more oil? And my grandmother's answer was, well, that's just how we always did it. But as the three of them thought about it, they realized, you know, the lamb doesn't need a cup of olive oil poured over it. Just a light brushing is just fine. And so they adapted their recipes to make it more nutritious and actually to make it more delicious, so it wasn't such an oily lamb dinner. And that's something that my mother has taught me. If you've got a tradition and it works and it really makes a difference, stick with it. But if it can be adapted, if it can be modified, do that too. And that's why today, in this Karithopita recipe, we're using Bisquick. Yes, it's newfangled. It's a modified version. It's a modified recipe. But it's not just as good, it's even better, and it makes a really easy and spectacular dessert. So let's get started making this cake. You'll need some Bisquick. You'll also need sugar. You'll need, for flavoring, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, ground cloves. This particular cake has a hint of orange, so you'll need some orange peel, either fresh or dried, and some orange extract. Of course, you'll need some honey, not too much, but just enough to give it some flavor. You'll need some walnuts, either coarsely ground in a food processor or finely chopped by hand. You'll need some eggs, 4 eggs. For leavening, you will need both baking powder and baking soda. And to hold it all together, you'll need some milk and some oil. Karithopita is a syrup-soaked cake. similar in concept to baklava. So the first thing we need to do is make the syrup so that it has time to cool before the cake is baked. So what you need to do is have a saucepan and add 1 cup of water, 1 cup of sugar, now the syrup is honey flavored, but it's not overwhelmingly honey flavored. So for this syrup we need 2 tablespoons of honey. And of course, if you get a little more, that certainly isn't going to hurt. It'll just make it more honey flavored. Okay. This is imperfect. It's a little more honey, and that's okay with me. And this entire cake has a hint of orange flavoring to it. So you'll need to add 1 teaspoon of orange extract to the syrup mixture. Turn the heat on to about medium, and you want to make sure that the sugar completely dissolves. Now as it heats, you just want to stir it so that the sugar becomes completely dissolved. You will be bringing this to a boil, and that's all. You don't need to boil it and get it to any kind of a thick syrup stage. But the main thing is that the sugar is dissolved. And I think you can see, little by little, as it heats up and you stir, the sugar is dissolving. Once the sugar was completely dissolved, I turned the heat up a little bit, kept stirring, and you can see it's ready to boil. All that needs to be done is that you bring the syrup to a boil. There's no need to boil it vigorously for 2, 3, 5 minutes. And here it goes. It's boiling. Once it's come to boil, just remove it from the heat and set it aside. It needs to cool. And already you can smell the wonderful combination of orange and honey, and it does smell delicious. That part's done. Now it's time to get started on the cake itself. One of the things that makes this cake special and so easy to make, not only does it use Bisquick, but it doesn't have to be beaten with an electric beater at all. You can do this whole thing by hand. And yet, the delicious cake with the walnuts and that syrup, it makes such a wonderful taste treat and a lovely presentation. People think you worked for hours and you really just threw it together. You'll need 2 cups of Bisquick. Okay, there's our 2 cups of Bisquick. You'll need 1 cup of sugar. As with all cakes, I'm mixing all the dry ingredients first. For leavening, you'll need 1½ teaspoons of baking powder. And be sure your baking powder is fresh. Check the expiration date. If it's too stale, your baked goods won't rise. You'll also need a half teaspoon of baking soda. For flavoring, you'll need a full teaspoon of ground cinnamon. And you'll need a half teaspoon each of ground nutmeg and ground cloves. Here's the nutmeg. And here's the cloves. This cake has all the seasonings, all the flavorings of the more elaborate Greek honey nut desserts, but it is so easy, and that's something that makes it special. Because this cake has a hint of orange in it, you want to add a half teaspoon of either dried orange peel or fresh grated orange peel. And those are your dry ingredients. Whisk them up together. So all the leavening is mixed throughout the Bisquick with the sugar and the flavorings. Now we're ready to focus on the wet ingredients. This cake recipe calls for 4 eggs, beaten. Although it's simple to make, it is a rich dessert with the eggs, the oil, the walnuts, and the honey syrup. Okay, these eggs look fine to me. Now it's time to add the other wet ingredients. 1 cup each of oil and milk. And as you add each liquid, just incorporate it into the eggs. And the last thing you want to add to the liquid mixture is a teaspoon of orange extract. and blend everything thoroughly. Okay, now we have our dry cake ingredients. We have our liquid cake ingredients. The only thing that's really missing, since this is a Greek walnut cake, we got to add the walnuts. And I want to tell you about these walnuts. My husband found them in the grocery store for me. He did some shopping for me. And they're called walnut chips. And they are the perfect consistency for a cake like this. If I were making baklava where I needed 2 pounds of walnuts, well, definitely, I'd buy them in bulk and I'd grind them myself. But for something like this, I think I might go with these really convenient walnut chips. But whatever, you need 1 to 1 1/4 cups of either finely chopped walnuts, not the consistency that they would sell in packages. You need to chop them up more so that they're finely chopped. Or you can use your food processor and grind them. However, if you're grinding them, then you want to make sure that they're coarsely ground. So either 1 to 1 1/4 cups finely chopped walnuts or coarsely ground walnuts, or if you have a devil-may-care attitude, pick up some of these walnut chips because they're the perfect consistency. Anyhow, 1 1/4 cups. Add them to your dry mixture. Hey, look at that. The package just about measures out perfectly with maybe a tablespoon more, and you know what? A little bit of extra walnuts could not possibly hurt this cake. That's great. Just mix the walnuts in with your dry ingredients. And then add the wet ingredients, the liquid ingredients, and incorporate it all nicely. Nice thing about this cake, it does not require beating with an electric beater. You can do this all by hand. It's great. It's not a fussy cake. It's just really tasty. And that's that. Look at the batter. It is thin. And that's how it's supposed to be. Has a lot of eggs, a lot of oil. And it's ready to go into the pan. You'll need a 13 by 9 inch baking pan. And you'll need to grease it lightly. All you have to do now is just pour the batter into the cake pan. And don't worry about it looking too thin. It will turn out to be a cake. Be sure you scrape all the batter, all those delicious walnuts into the pan. The cake needs to bake for 30 minutes in a 350-degree oven. It's been 30 minutes, so I'm going to check the cake to make sure that it's completely baked. And the whole kitchen smells of the wonderful cinnamon and cloves. Delicious. Yes, That cake is cooked. And look at it. That really thin, watery batter made this delicious cake. I'm going to just check it to make sure it's completely cooked. No batter clinging to this. So this cake is done. And all I need to do now is take it out and let it sit and let it cool for 10 minutes before I do anything else. After the cake has cooled for 10 minutes, you want to cut it. Now, if you want to get fancy and you want to be traditionally Greek, you can cut it into diamond shapes. So you cut like this, diagonally, then turn the pan and cut it the other direction. If you don't care about the diamond shapes, just cut it into squares or rectangles. And you can make the pieces as large as you want or as small as you want, depending on the amount of people you'll be serving. So you cut the cake first, and then comes the syrup. All right, now that the cake is cut into serving pieces, this is the time where you would pour the syrup over. Remember, this syrup has been cooling the entire time that you were baking the cake. And just take a ladle and try to distribute the syrup as evenly as possible. And what a combination of flavors. The honey, orange, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. Absolutely delicious. And that's it. Only thing left to do is just leave this cake alone. It needs to stand so that the cake absorbs that delicious syrup. It needs to stand for at least 2 hours. Overnight would be preferable, but at least 2 hours. So, a nice thing about this dessert is you can get it made early in the morning, pour the syrup on, and then just leave it alone. Don't refrigerate it. It doesn't need refrigeration, and refrigeration would actually ruin it. So you're set. So I'm going to take a 2-hour break, come back, and then serve up some for myself. The cake is soaked and it's ready to serve. And I'm telling you, this is easy, but it's a spectacular dessert. Just serve up a nice slice. Look at that. It's pretty as it is. It's chock full of walnuts, has those wonderful flavorings. It's very, very moist because of the syrup. And to dress it up a little, you can add a little dollop of whipped cream. You could also serve it with a small scoop of very high quality vanilla ice cream. The cake is also good with berries, any kind of fresh berries. Today I've got some raspberries. Just put a few on the side with the delicious honey-soaked cake and the whipped cream. It makes a wonderful dessert, especially with a nice cup of hot coffee or hot tea. It's a perfect ending to a fancy dinner. It's so easy to make. As I said before, people think you really worked hard, but it's so simple. Why don't you try it? Karithopita, Greek walnut cake. Oh, for heaven's sakes, you left behind the best part, the cake.